In part 1, we examined how the arrest of Nicolás Maduro in January 2026 did not bring down Chavismo. On the contrary, it froze the old elite in power under an American umbrella. Caracas settled into a strange kind of stability. Western companies returned to the oil market, the military remains silent, and the opposition is still in exile. But beyond the capital, the picture looks entirely different. Venezuela is not just Caracas. It is a vast territory where the central government has long lost control over entire regions. Power here does not belong to generals from the Ministry of Defense, but to armed groups: Colombian insurgents in the west, FARC remnants, Venezuelan colectivos, and Brazilian criminal clans. This is also where millions of refugees are trying either to return home or to flee Venezuela altogether. And this is where the neighbors come in: Colombia, Brazil, Cuba, each playing its own game. In part 2, we break down how the Venezuelan fire is spreading across the continent, why Colombia is preparing for a potential incursion, and whether Brazil can shield the Amazon from chaos. The border between Venezuela and Colombia stretches for 2,200 kilometers of jungle, rivers, and mountains. It is the most vulnerable fault line on the continent. When Maduro was arrested, Colombia found itself at the epicenter. President Gustavo Petro, a longtime critic of Chavismo but an even longer-standing opponent of U.S. intervention in Latin America, faced a dilemma: close the border and deepen the humanitarian crisis, or open it and risk letting in not only refugees but armed militants. In January 2026, just a week after Maduro's arrest, Colombia declared a state of emergency along the entire border region. Petro ordered 15,000 troops to the frontier, nearly a third of the country's combat-ready forces. The official reason? To prevent the infiltration of Venezuelan armed groups and weapons. But the problem runs deeper. After years of crisis, the border has become a true gray zone, dominated by armed criminal groups. Colombia's army numbers around 250,000, Venezuela's about 150,000, yet neither fully controls its own territory.
According to the Fundación por la Paz, as of early 2026, more than 60 Colombian border municipalities are under partial or full control of illegal armed groups. The main threats? The National Liberation Army, ELN, with about 2,500 fighters, FARC dissidents, another 1,500 to 2,000, and the Clan del Golfo, the country's largest drug cartel. All maintain stable ties with Venezuelan security forces. In March 2026, Colombian intelligence intercepted a shipment of 300 rifles and anti-tank launchers traveling from Venezuela's Apure state to ELN camps in Arauca. The weapons bore markings of the Venezuelan armed forces. Caracas denies involvement, but unofficially, many local commanders continue to trade weapons and protect drug trafficking networks, because a $100 salary barely covers food. Petro is trapped. His leftist government has traditionally sympathized with Chavismo, yet he is now forced to cooperate with the United States on security to contain the chaos. For now, Colombia rejects a full-scale military invasion, but leaves the door open to limited cross-border operations against armed groups hiding in Venezuela. This sets a dangerous precedent. If Colombia carries out operations on foreign soil, it could either trigger a full-scale conflict or signal to neighboring states that Caracas is no longer capable of defending its own territory. Brazil shares a 2,200-kilometer border with Venezuela, mostly through the remote Amazon. Yet this region fuels a vast shadow economy tied to smuggling, human trafficking, and resource exploitation. According to the UNHCR, by April 2026, around 500,000 Venezuelans are in Brazil. Most are concentrated in Roraima, where refugees now make up 15% of the population. Local resources are stretched thin. Hospitals are overcrowded, schools run triple shifts, and crime is rising. President Lula da Silva, re-elected in 2023, long sought to mediate between Maduro and the opposition. After Maduro's arrest,
Lula publicly condemned American arbitrariness, but quickly recalibrated. Brazil did not sanction Delcy Rodriguez's new government. Instead, Lula met with her in February 2026 to discuss restoring trade and energy cooperation. Brazil is now one of the few major suppliers of food and medicine to Venezuela. In March 2026, Lula signed a deal to export Brazilian corn, soy, and meat in exchange for Venezuelan oil at discounted prices, a mutually beneficial arrangement.
But there's a bigger ambition. Brazil is lobbying for a gas pipeline from Venezuelan fields to Amazonas state. This would reduce reliance on expensive LNG and strengthen Brazil's role as a regional energy hub. China is ready to finance the project, using Brazil as a proxy to retain influence in Venezuela. At the same time, Lula understands the risks. In March 2026, Brazil deployed 3,000 Special Forces troops to Roraima, officially to combat illegal gold mining, but in reality to prevent the spillover of Venezuelan criminal groups. Brazil's strategy is dual: economic integration with the new regime, combined with political and military distancing from the chaos. Whether Lula can maintain this balance remains an open question. If Colombia and Brazil are reactive neighbors, Cuba is a country whose fate was directly tied to the survival of Chavismo. For over 20 years, Cuba received up to 100,000 barrels of Venezuelan oil per day at preferential prices. In exchange, Havana sent doctors, teachers, intelligence officers, and military advisors. By some estimates, this deal brought Cuba up to $3 billion annually. Maduro's arrest and the shift of oil control toward the United States hit Cuba like an economic tsunami. By February 2026, oil supplies had dropped by 70 to 80%. Cuba has plunged back into an energy crisis reminiscent of the 1990s special period. Rolling blackouts lasting 12 to 14 hours, fuel lines stretching for days. The government of Miguel Diaz-Canel has reportedly sought direct talks with Washington. In March 2026, reports emerged of secret negotiations with the Trump administration. Cuba would release political prisoners and allow free elections in exchange for lifting the embargo and restoring oil supplies, this time from the US. No official confirmation exists, but experts agree the Cuban regime stands at the brink.
Russia, also losing influence in Venezuela, is pivoting toward Cuba. In early 2026, 2 Russian ships delivered wheat and diesel, a symbolic gesture, but far from enough. Moscow can no longer replace Venezuelan oil. What lies ahead for Cuba? Either regime collapse and a second Havana Spring, or a harsher dictatorship backed by Russia and China. One thing is clear: Cuba is no longer a proxy player in Venezuela. Its influence has collapsed. Any discussion of regional spillover must include people. Over 8 million Venezuelans have left the country, one of the largest migration crises in modern history. After Maduro's arrest and partial stabilization, many sought to return. According to the International Organization for Migration, about 120,000 people went back from Colombia in the first 3 months of 2026. But reality proved harsher. Returnees face hostility from local authorities, who see them as traitors. There are no jobs, no housing. Many leave again. Meanwhile, the outflow hasn't stopped. It has simply changed direction. Now people flee not only hunger or repression, but uncertainty and crime. In March 2026, Colombia recorded a 25% increase in Venezuelan asylum applications compared to December 2025. Neighboring countries are overwhelmed. The UN has requested $1.2 billion for refugee support in 2026, but donors have shifted focus to Ukraine, Sudan, and the Middle East. South America's refugees are once again sidelined. Let's sum up.
First, Colombia is in a state of hybrid war along its eastern border, containing not just refugees, but armed groups using Venezuela as a safe haven. Second, Brazil is playing a complex dual game, economic engagement paired with political caution. Third, Cuba is losing its primary lifeline, Venezuelan oil, and faces a stark choice between economic collapse and political concessions. Fourth, millions of Venezuelan refugees represent a slow-burning social crisis across Latin America. Africa is burning. The Middle East is on fire. South America is holding its breath. Subscribe. Part 3 is coming next. Thanks for watching. Bye.